Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're breaking down a document that makes a pretty bombshell accusation that our entire justice system is being secretly manipulated by a high-tech network. It's a really complex story that tries to connect the dots between some sophisticated data analysis, some very questionable legal procedures, and the life of one man, Paul Nanez, who, as we speak, is sitting in prison. So, right off the bat, the author wants to make something crystal clear. This whole thing, it's not about trying to prove Paul Nanez is innocent or guilty. No. As this opening quote says, it's a call to action. It's basically a public demand for an official investigation into the deeply, deeply strange circumstances surrounding his case. And that brings us to the absolute core of it, the main claim here, that a hidden organized network is actually using technology to exploit the legal system for its own purposes. And the author doesn't just throw that out there. He claims he's got the data to back it up. So let's take a look at how he says he pulled it off. I mean, how could you possibly even begin to track an operation that's supposed to be completely hidden? Well, the author's answer was to build his own framework, something that acts like a digital detective. It's designed to sift through all sorts of public records and even private data, hunting for clues of this alleged corruption. Okay, so the whole investigation really hinges on this, a super controversial data set the author calls the GeoIndex. Now get this, he claims it was leaked from Venezuelan intelligence. I mean, that's a massive claim all by itself. This database supposedly has geographic data, records of crypto payments, and even these so-called espionage scores for a ton of people. According to the author, this is the key that unlocks the entire hidden network. So with this data, he uses a pretty straightforward three-step analysis. First, he's just scanning documents for specific patterns or markers. Things like names that pop up a lot, certain keywords, or number sequences. Then he just counts how many hits he gets for any one person or company. And finally, he mashes all those counts together into a single score, which he argues shows how connected that person is to this alleged network. Okay, so what happens when you actually run the numbers with this method? Well, the author applied his scoring system to a public list of attorneys, and the results, he says, weren't just interesting, they were staggering. The analysis spit back one name that just blew everything else out of the water, an attorney named Chris Branson, who scored over 32 million. Now, to put that into perspective for you, the next highest score on that list was just 5 million. And almost everyone else, they were under 500,000. We're not just talking about an outlier here. This is statistically off the charts. So who is this guy, Chris Branson, this massive outlier? Well, the document identifies him as a lawyer who specializes in Child Protective Services cases, CPS. That's a field that deals with some of the absolute most vulnerable people in our society. And it's that combination, this insane data score and a really sensitive legal job, that makes the author decide he needs to take a much, much closer look at Branson's specific cases. And this is where everything zooms in. We go from these huge data sets and abstract numbers right down to a real concrete human story. The author's focus narrows from thousands of data points down to one single case file on Chris Branson's desk, the case of a man named Paul Nanez. Now, the timeline of this Nanez case is absolutely crucial to the author's whole argument. You gotta look at the sequence of events here. A really serious charge from a decade ago is just sitting there, dormant. Then, all of a sudden, there's a recent arrest, not for a new crime, but for a registration failure, and almost immediately right after that arrest, a whole new case is launched to take away Nanez's parental rights for good. And here's the kicker, the absolute linchpin of the whole argument. The number one person of interest from that entire data analysis, the massive outlier, Chris Branson, he's the exact attorney assigned to represent the child in Paul Nanez's parental rights case. From this point, the author starts pointing out what he calls procedural red flags all over the court records. He lays out this whole series of oddities that really forces you to ask, are these all just mind-blowing coincidences, or are we looking at a deliberate pattern of strange anomalies? One of the most glaring things he presents is this, what he calls the docket coincidence. Check this out. Two related cases in two completely different courts have case numbers that are almost identical. They're just off by a single letter. Now, the author alleges this is no accident. He suggests it's a technique that could be used to confuse the system, to make it way easier to misfile, hide, or even swap court records if someone wanted to. So where does all this lead? Well, the author starts connecting these dots, the data, the outlier attorney, the weird case anomalies. And he builds it all toward his final and, frankly, his most serious accusation. He argues that these aren't just isolated incidents. He says they're evidence of what's called a RICO enterprise. Now, that's a legal term you don't just throw around. RICO comes from the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, and legally speaking, it's the big guns. It's the same powerful tool prosecutors use to take down organized crime syndicates by proving there's a coordinated pattern of criminal activity. So the author's ultimate theory is that this organized group is actually weaponizing the court system itself, turning it into a kind of industrialized assembly line for targeting people. And bringing up RICO is so critical here because it's one of the very few ways you can even try to get around the legal immunity that judges and lawyers usually have for things they do as part of their official jobs. And so the document brings us right back where we started, back to its opening plea. The argument is that the Paul Nanez case, it's not really just about one man's freedom anymore. It's become a test case for the entire system that's supposed to protect that freedom in the first place. In the end, this document doesn't pretend to have all the answers. Instead, it just leaves us with this provocative and, frankly, unsettling question. Is this a data-driven expose of a corrupt system, or is it all just a labyrinth of unbelievable coincidences? The author doesn't decide for us, but he insists the evidence is just way too compelling to ignore, and that now it's up to the official authorities to find the truth.